In introducing this session, I really want to lose no time in getting two possible misconceptions out of the way. In the first place, by choosing to organize a panel on museums' tilt toward modern and contemporary art, I'm not making any claim to originality here. I realize that I'm pointing out something that is something so obvious that it has practically become part of the landscape or the air we breathe. And I'll explain in just a moment why I feel that even such a visible tendency does merit a closer, more focused look from within the curatorial ranks. A second risk, something that I am very keen to deflect, is a perception of personal hostility toward this cultural trend. I want to assure you, it is not at all my intention with this session to suggest any sort of animus toward modern and contemporary art, or indeed toward the important work that modern and contemporary curators do. Indeed, it would be rather foolhardy of me to do such a thing, given that there are so very many of you out there. Way to make yourself popular, kind of like coming to Houston and saying, maybe we should, saying that the nation is too dependent on fossil fuels or something like that. So, no, but quite seriously, though, I do believe that a pause to reflect on museums' unmistakable shift toward mod con, in the shorthand version, is worthwhile and timely. So no one in the field and very few people outside of it can be ignorant of the general tendency. Anyone who has darkened the door of an art museum lately is apt to have noticed the increase in shows dedicated to the art of our time or the recent past, and also the insistent efforts to market other kinds of shows in present-day terms. Any reader of the art press will be aware of the vast sums of money going toward contemporary art at auctions and fairs, contemporary being not just the hotter sector than any other, but one that threatens to consume all the oxygen in the room, rendering other sectors irrelevant or moribund. And anyone who keeps tabs on high-profile museum acquisitions cannot fail to have picked up on the strenuous efforts of museums to court the highest-flying collectors of contemporary art. So, allocation of resources, curatorial hiring, renovation and expansion projects, PR and branding, collections and deaccessioning, almost no aspect of museums' activities or institutional priorities has gone untouched by the tilt toward the now. News items called over the past 6 months tell this story to irrefutable effect and can be easily converted into a game of who said this. So I will be giving you here 4 examples prefaced by 4 quotes. Quote 1. Here's a museum in which the collections are in fact global, and I began to think about what it would mean to examine that through a contemporary lens, so that they are relevant to the world we live in today. Who said this? Anne Pasternak, named director to the Brooklyn Museum in late 2015, and one of whose first moves was to recruit Nancy Spector, a contemporary art specialist from the Guggenheim Museum, to chief curator at Brooklyn. Quote 2. A lot of trustees look to contemporary art as the driving force because that is where the wealth is going. The challenge is that it is pushing aside the entire history of art, and the field is in jeopardy. Who said this? Maxwell Anderson, former director of the Dallas Museum of Art, now executive director of the New Cities Foundation, in a recent book of interviews by Michael Shapiro called 11 Museums, 11 Directors, Conversations on Art and Leadership. Quote 3. Museums don't need to be fashionable. Who said this? Noted designer Karim Rashid in response to the Metropolitan Museum's rollout of its new and controversial logo. For Rashid, the Met is all about history, whereas Met Chairman Daniel Brodsky defended the logo change by emphasizing the museum as a changing institution in a changing world. Quote 4. As time moves on, 1900 seems increasingly remote. Hard to argue with that. But who said it? And in what context? Gabriele Finaldi, new director of the National Gallery in London, whose division of collections with the Tate was always fixed at 1900. Now, Finaldi says that he wants to extend this possibly to World War II. Now, there are other examples. I don't want to take up too much time, but a couple I find interesting. A couple of years ago, the International Fine Print Dealers Association offered a grant that could be applied for by print curators in one of two categories, pre-World War II, post-World War II. And this split seemed to presume, as a way of giving a fair shot to everyone, a 50-50 division of curators into those two fields of specialty. Is 1945 really the new midpoint of art historical study? For the most prominent evidence, though, of the greatest share of resources and attention being dedicated to modern and contemporary art, look to the big institutions. They are voting with their feet as well as their footprints. Witness the Art Institute of Chicago, whose modern wing opened in 2009 as the largest expansion in the museum's history, adding 264,000 square feet, and most recently the Met Breuer being leased from the Whitney Museum for the next 8 years at least, an arrangement amplified by the renovation of modern and contemporary galleries in the Met's Fifth Avenue building. So, and to these examples could, of course, be added many, many others. So, how does this all affect our role as curators? No matter what field we're in, mod, con, or not, we need to recognize that this emphasis carries with it a distinct set of pressures and challenges as well as opportunities. Yes, the focus on the present-day relevance of museum offerings may help in engaging with younger audiences who will become the devoted visitors and donor patrons of the future, and may help in securing a role for museums once seen as stodgy institutions at the center of vital social and cultural discourses. But along with these possibilities, is there an implied directive to display or interpret historical collections in such a way that they come clearly into line with contemporary concerns? Does recontextualization with regard to the present risk skewing decisions about collecting or exhibiting works of art? Do traditional periodizations or field divisions start to cave into larger drives for organizational restructuring? And what long-term impact does that have? Do we make a mistake in assuming a single kind of visitor, one who enjoys being surrounded by contemporary references easily relatable to him or herself, and ignoring the one who comes to museums, on the contrary, to be transported imaginatively away? So what I've asked these afternoon's panelists to reflect on is how the terms of the debate over relevance may differ from one museum to another, what compromises or trade-offs may be involved, and how curators, whatever their specific field, can ensure that they retain a strong voice in institutional decision-making. So I'm very pleased to turn over the mic to the first of our three panelists. I won't give extensive biographies here because they're all in your booklet, but we'll start with Oliver Tostmann, who is the Susan Morse Hills Curator of European Art at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford.
Thank you, Anne. Can you hear me, or does this work? So when it's on? Okay. Can you hear me? Hello. Thank you very much, Anne. And thank you for inviting me. My approach will be very hands-on, very practical, less philosophical, as you will see. And so this is me. Yeah. I'm the curator of European art at the Wadsworth Atheneum, and I oversee a collection that basically starts with ancient art or parts of the ancient art and move over to the early 20th century up to 1945. I'm overseeing paintings, drawings, and sculpture. And I will speak today about our old masters and how they can experience now thanks to our recent reinstallation at the Wadsworth Atheneum. I will touch a little bit on our contemporary art collection as well, because both collections were reinstalled at about the same time. From about 2010 to 2015, we underwent a significant renovation campaign, which arguably affected the old masters and contemporary art the most at the Athenaeum. Before that, there were many, many years in which the infrastructure was suffering. It became dilapidated. We had leaking roofs. The windows needed to be exchanged. The storage space needed to be brought up to date and also needed to be expanded, and so forth. And as a result, the collection was traveling for many, many years during the past decades. Several galleries were permanently closed, and parts of the collections, contemporary as much as the old masters, were split between several buildings. All in all, the visitor during those years could at best make a rather fragmented experience of the collections at the Athenaeum. And now, after the reinstallation, after the reopening in last September, we are able to show as many works as never before. We increased the exhibition and gallery space by 27%, and we completely rehung and reinterpreted the old masters and contemporary art collections. We also swapped galleries between the departments and hope to provide a more coherent experience to visitors now. The old masters, and this is just speaking me personally, I think that the old masters profited from the enhancement of the contemporary art galleries, and I very much hope that that's also true vice versa for the contemporary art, and I will tell in a little bit about that in more detail. There is something, it sounded first a little bit pathetic to me in the beginning, but internally we sometimes use a term called the Wordsworth spirit. And the Wordsworth spirit means that contemporary art and the old masters, they actually walk hand in hand, they embrace each other. There is no antagonism felt at the museum. What you see here on the image is the facade seen from Main Street. You have on the left side the main entrance, which pretty much looks the same these days, during which you enter the museum. Behind the entrance, you walk through the hall, and then there will be the first contemporary art gallery. If you turn to the right, you come into the cold building, which is here in the center, and which also shows the second part of the contemporary art collection. And then on the right side here, this whole building, this Beaux-Arts building, is the building that houses the European arts collection now, the old masters. The building was built between 1910 and 1915, thanks to a donation by J.P. Morgan. And if we go further, maybe this map here shows it a little bit clearer. So this is here again, this is the main entrance of the building. You go here, this is a new contemporary art gallery space that has been reopened last year as well. And then to the right is the second contemporary art space, and through which you pass this corridor and you enter the Morgan building. I spoke about the Wordsworth spirit, and there is probably no better image than this one from Avery Court that demonstrates this attitude. The court the building was designed and built by a director in the early 1930s, Chick Austin, who had a passion for modern art. He bought for us fantastic modern art. He bought for us Mondrian, Picasso's. He was an avid collector of the Surrealists. And so it's not really surprising that the museum building that he built was of the latest fashion in this international Bauhausy style. At the same time, he was also an avid collector of the old masters, specifically of Baroque art. He really built up the Wordsworth's extensive holdings of Baroque art, and he bought this wonderful sculpture by Pietro Francavilla and decided to have it right in the center of the brand new Avery Court. Nowadays, you see here on the walls, you see our modern art collection. So you see the Mondrian, the Schlemmer, the Max Ernst Miro, and so forth. And in the center, thrones Venus with an infant satire. And since then, we somewhat cultivated this legacy of looking at contemporary art and at the old masters at the same time. Other important features are our matrix program, for which we invite contemporary artists to come to the museum and to become inspired by the collections and to come up with an own exhibition. Here in this case, you see how the artist took some of our old frames and found inspiration in some of our portraits. This is also a long-lasting series, this matrix series. It was founded in 1975. Another aspect of our contemporary art collection is here is this brand new space, which in the past housed our old masters collection, or large parts of our old masters collection. It had been completely renovated, and now you can see it in all its brutalist splendor. There's another image. And then, last but not least, I showed to you the second wing in which the contemporary art collection is housed. You see here parts of it. And if you walk through this door here, you will go right into the Morgan building and you will end up right into in the old masters, with the old masters at the Athenaeum. Again, a map. So I guided you through this gallery here, and then you go into Morgan Great Hall. If you want to enter Morgan Great Hall from the other entrance as a visitor, you actually have to pass through the Hillis Gallery, the freshly renovated contemporary art space. And then you have to walk through, and you end up at every court where you see the Francavilla sculpture together with the modern art collection, and then you walk through here and enter the Morgan building. So this is now here a map of the Morgan building, which, as I said, is built in a Beaux-Arts style. It is dominated by this huge grand hall in the center. It has two floors, which both run around the center here. And what was shown in Morgan Great Hall until very recently was a selection of our large-scale contemporary artworks. You can see here the photographs. Here's a Gursky photograph. You can see then here on the other side, there's our Rauschenberg, Franz Klein, and it goes further with the de Kooning and so forth. The results of this contemporary art installation in the heart of the Morgan building were somewhat mixed. People never, not many people warmed up to that installation, partly because of the just contrast of architecture, the Beaux-Arts architecture, which doesn't lend itself automatically into the presentation of contemporary art. But also, if you see these entrances here, these doors, they lead to small side galleries. And those small side galleries have been continuously displayed old masters. And so there's kind of next to next of old masters in small scale, rather low side galleries, and the contemporary works in the Grand Morgan Great Hall wasn't the most felicitous solution. What we did instead is that we gave the Morgan Great Hall back to the old masters. This is now the way how you can experience them. And we tried to provide a more coherent experience by dedicating all the galleries in the Morgan building to the old masters. You see that the old masters are hung in the salon style. It's a very immersive space because of the schools, the paintings, they're all mixed. You will find paintings from the 16th century hanging right next to paintings of the 19th century. There are no labels. We do provide, however, some small guides that you can grab and that basically give you the tombstone information. All in all, it's a rather unguided experience. First, the visitor is meant to be overwhelmed by the art, and then little by little, he can make his own itinerary through this seemingly chaotic hanging. He can make his own experiences. He can discover similarities of difference of schools, of artists. He can start his own thinking. We also mixed into this hanging, into this display here, not only European schools, but also a few selected American paintings. We have a couple of history paintings or paintings with historical subjects that touch on local events from ranging from the Revolutionary Wars up to the important personalities from Hartford or Connecticut up to the Civil War. And we very much hope to engage the visitors with this kind of mixed hanging. I give you a few more slides here. You see here in the center one of our most popular paintings by Giovanni Paolo Panini. On the left to the right, we have these quadruples and lots of paintings on top of it. I mentioned the Panini, which is of course one of the main reasons why we hung the Morgan Great Hall in such a salon style. Another reason is J. Pierpont Morgan, who gave the money, who gave us also large parts of his art collection, and with Morgan also just the hanging style of Gilded Age collections. This is all very loosely inspired by those examples. Here you see, this is a fitting example. Here you see on this wall, you see in the center a painting by the Venetian artist Tintoretto depicting a mythological scene, and underneath you see a academic painting by Lord Leighton from the late 19th century. And I wanted to juxtapose them because I wanted to show how much Lord Leighton actually owes to a painter like Tintoretto. And you also see a couple of other late 19th century academic paintings here, and that are then, they also respond to these Baroque works underneath. And right here on the very edge, on the right edge, you see a painting with a huge gilded frame, which is a copy after Raphael. So I also included some of our copies in our collection, something that hasn't been, there was no record whatsoever that those copies have ever been shown at our museum. This is here another example showing that I hung certain paintings in clusters, in quadruples here. You see, all these paintings are Dutch paintings, and by clustering together, I felt that they would rather lose if I would hang these small-scale paintings right next to larger Italians or larger French paintings or whatsoever. So I really wanted the visitors to give an experience of a unique experience of Dutch painting of the 17th century. Back to this vista. The side galleries that we can see here on the left, they lead into some temporary exhibition spaces that we created. These exhibition spaces allow us to show parts of our own collection. as I said earlier, I'm also the curator of prints and drawings, and so we are able to show parts of our prints and drawings collection and can rotate them on and off in the Morgan Great Hall. Which on the other side, you see, which is here, you see entrances leading in here, and those small galleries, they lead into this direction, and they start with ancient art, and then it basically goes in a chronological sequence over to the Renaissance art, to the late Renaissance art, that you can see in these small galleries. And when you leave this hall, you need to take steps, grand stairs, and go upstairs to the second floor. And the first gallery that you will enter there is this gallery, which has been conceived and designed by my colleague Linda Roth, who is the curator of decorative arts at the Athenaeum, with whom I worked very closely on this reinstallation campaign. She wanted to have this equally immersive Kunst- und Wunderkammer at the Athenaeum for the main reason that our collection just automatically lends into this kind of display. We have a huge collection of all kinds of objects that could have been displayed at the Kunst- und Wunderkammer in the 17th century. They're coming from J.P. Morgan. We also have glass. We have glasses. We have majolica. We have you see here these cabinets in the background. We have small ivory sculptures, and we also do have lots of paintings that all kind of ideally fit into such a space. Again, similar to the Morgan Great Hall, we don't follow any concrete historical model. We just want to give the visitor the experience of such a Kunst- und Wunderkammer. You can see the little screens here, so the visitor actually has this possibility to have a kind of interactive experience. He can create his own characters. He can make research. He or she can make research about the objects. And when you leave the Kunst- und Wunderkammer, you will come to our early Baroque gallery. And as I said, it's a chronological approach. So you're now in the Baroque section of our museum. And this is a unusual candidate because it is the only gallery in the Morgan building that, with the exception of Great Hall, that only shows paintings. You can see the Caravaggio, which is one of our most popular paintings. Then you can see a wonderful Ribera here. You can also see a very important painting by Poussin, a Zurbarán, and so forth. So this is really a room that displays the strengths of our collection, the treasures of our collection. If you go further, you come into smaller galleries, and all these galleries are much more linked through broader themes. So instead of looking at specific schools, we rather came up with themes such as belief or nature, patronage, or as in this case, artistic exchange. They're all following a kind of humanistic pattern. So you see here on the walls, you see paintings. Oops, that's fine. You see paintings by Italian artists, by Northern artists. They all mingled in Italy, and at some point, they all found some mutual inspiration from each other. This is also enhanced by display of decorative art. We really took efforts this time to mix the decorative arts together with paintings and sculptures. And you can see a similar approach here in the late Baroque gallery, which is 2 galleries further up, which is the largest gallery. And here in this case, the decorative arts really kind of enhance the display of the paintings. The gallery is devoted to the courtly arts of about 1800. And the last example that I want to show to you today is this gallery, which we call the 1789 gallery. It is entirely devoted to the French Revolution, and it shows different perspectives taken by artists from different cultural backgrounds, from different nationalities on the French Revolution. And
Hello,
this is
hello.
one of, sorry?
Hello.
This might be one of our biggest surprises for visitors, because we quite prominently display paintings that have been sleeping in our storage spaces for a number of years. This is a painting by an American painter, Mather Brown, who wanted to make his career in England in the 1790s. He depicts Louis XVI during his time in prison. And here you see a painting by Johann Safany. It's a gruesome comment on what was going on in France at that time. But we also do have a painting which takes a more optimistic stance, a more pro-revolutionary stance by the school of David, and also a couple of decorative art objects. So this is, again, very similar to the other galleries. It takes a more humanistic themed approach. We really center here on one political event that we try to look at from different perspectives. The gallery itself is kind of anchoring the southeast corner of the museum, because if you come from the Baroque section, you will end up, which is from the right side, you will end up in this gallery. And if you want to proceed to the early 19th century and late 19th century galleries, you have to come through this gallery. So this gallery really informs your view of what was how the 19th century actually was flowering out of the French Revolution. I think that, as I said earlier, that this whole campaign, which took 5 years at the Athenaeum, really helped both the contemporary collection but also the old masters to display its strengths. And for the time being, we didn't have the institutional capacities to think more innovatively about blending works from one collection with other works from another collection. But it's certainly something that Patty Hickson, who is the curator of contemporary art, and I would like to do in the future. And with this, I'll leave it to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Our next speaker will be Talisa Fleming. So in contrast to the reflections on an installation that has been done, we will now have an anticipatory look at what we can expect at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where Talisa is curator and art historian.
Okay, as you can see, I'm going rogue, but I have to see the slides. Okay, this is going on automatic. So, can someone help me take this off of automatic? Thank you. While you get a lovely preview of my PowerPoint, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So when I was invited to be on this panel dealing with this issue, or sort of bifurcation of contemporary art and older wonderful art, it was interesting because I'm an Americanist, and at this museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and in my former position as the American curator at the Dayton Art Institute, I covered pre-colonial to the present, and I also did decorative arts and glass. So I never really saw the difference in terms of approach. So today I'm going to discuss my exhibition, Visual Art and the American Experience, which is a dedicated gallery in our museum. And I'm going to talk about how it was conceived and developed with the goal of making the experience of viewing art in a non-traditional art space interesting, relevant, and meaningful to our future museum patrons. So for those of you who are not familiar with our museum, the National Museum of African American History and Culture was created in 2003 by an act of Congress establishing it as part of the Smithsonian Institution. It is located on a 5-acre site on Constitution Avenue between 14th and 15th Streets Northwest, which many of you who have been to DC will recognize as the site directly between the National Monument and the National Museum of American History. The museum is devoted exclusively to the documentation of African American life, art, history, and culture. The museum will be a place where all Americans and also people of other nationalities can come to and learn about the richness and diversity of the African American experience and what that means to their lives and how it helped us shape this nation. Our mission is to be a place that transcends the boundaries of race and culture that divide us and becomes a lens into the story that unites us all. Like many museums, one of the primary methods that we have used to convey the tenets of our stated mission is through the vehicle of the permanent exhibition. By opening day, which is fast approaching September 24th of this year, the museum will feature 11 permanent exhibition spaces in addition to our Center for African American Media Arts and our exhibition on the history of museum titled 100 Years in the Making, curated by Michelle Wilkinson, who's here in our audience. In brief, our exhibitions are divided into 3 thematic clusters: history, community, and culture. The history galleries, there are 3 galleries. The first one is Slavery and Freedom. The second is Defending Freedom, Defining Freedom, the Era of Segregation, 1876 to 1968. And the third is A Changing America, 1968 and Beyond, also curated by my esteemed colleague, Michelle Wilkinson. The second section is our community cluster. This entails 4 different exhibitions, the first being Sports, Leveling the Playing Field, Double Victory, the African American Military Experience, The Power of Place, and Making a Way Out of No Way. And the third and final cluster has 4 exhibitions as well: Cultural Expressions, Taking the Stage, Musical Crossroads, and my personal favorite, Visual Arts and the American Experience, which is curated by myself and our chief curator, Jacqueline Surwer. When Jackie and I were first tasked with the responsibility of creating a traditional art gallery within the non-traditional space of a history and culture museum, we took several factors into consideration as we began to conceive of what form such an endeavor should take. For example, we knew, close your eyes. We knew that most people who entered our museum would not necessarily expect to see a dedicated art gallery. We were concerned with the idea that many people, regardless of race, view artwork by African Americans as a separate and distinct art form from the production of non-Black American artists. We were cognizant of the fact that African Americans are severely underrepresented in the overall visitorship of American art museums for a variety of reasons, including our country's history of racism and segregation, which extended to our nation's museums, a lack of visible representation in the museum, which includes both staffing as well as the art objects on view, a lack of sustained engagement. Go back one more. No, go back. To the roles. Okay, there we go. A lack of sustained engagements with communities of color, a general feeling of not being welcomed, and a feeling that art in many museums is not reflective of their lives and/or experiences. To address these concerns, we set aside a series of goals. The first is to change the way we think about art created by African Americans from African American art or Black art to simply American art. Throughout the history of this country, African American artists, in one form or another, have been forced to grapple with this idea of categorization. And in doing my research from the late 18th century to the present and learning about these issues that artists were talking about in their own career, one of the most salient through lines is this idea of not being able to be seen as just an artist. This issue has been quite detrimental to the field at large, as historically, Black artists have been ignored, marginalized, and undervalued as important and vital contributors to the art world. Our second goal is to demonstrate the ways that artists respond to various themes and issues over time, region, and space. Our position on this subject is that artists, like all human beings, respond to issues and events that affect our society, our community, our families, and ourselves. As such, we decided to organize the gallery by theme, as opposed to a linear, time-based trajectory or by artistic movement. Additionally, we collected artworks that directly engage themes and issues addressed throughout the museum, giving our audience multiple points of entry into how they experience and relate to various works of art. The third tenet is to present American history, culture, and art history through the lens of the African American artist. This point is particularly important as African Americans have had particular challenges in this country due to racial oppression and bias, which is significantly different than that of, say, a white male artist. This additional layer of interpretation both complicates and enriches our understanding of who we are as Americans and how that manifests in visual culture. And our fourth goal is to provide a safe and engaging space where visitors can learn about art and its relevance to their lives. This concern reflects our, when I was at the Dayton Art Institute, I would often sit in our abstraction and contemporary gallery and listen to what people would say. And I was in Ohio, Middle America, and people would also get very defensive and feel that they didn't have enough information, their children can do it, why is it in the museum? And I didn't want visitors to our museum, and once again, who may not expect to be visiting an art gallery, to feel that when they walked in. So to help alleviate some of these concerns, we made certain that all of the objects in our exhibition had extended text labels. And all of those labels pertain specifically to what they were seeing. And in any of the cases that we could, we tried to insert the artist's voice, a quote from the artist, because I think that's also important in a way that the visitor can feel more comfortable and like they're really understanding what the artist was trying to convey in their work. We also are going to have an interactive in our galleries so that people who are interested maybe in military history could look at an artwork about the military, learn about the context that this artwork was created, learn more about the biography of that artist, etc. And I'll speak to that a little later in my presentation. And eventually we hope to have a presence on the web so that visitors in maybe another country who never have the opportunity to come to our museum can look at the works in our gallery. People can prepare for their visit, or if there's something that they didn't have time for, because most people don't spend more than an hour, hour and a half at an individual Smithsonian museum, we'll be able to follow up at home. So how do we organize the gallery? Okay, so you come in this way. So this is the culture. Why does it keep doing that? This is the culture gallery, and you walk into this entryway here. And here's sort of an introductory experience. This is going to be a wonderful art video, which I can't tell you about now because we're in negotiations. You go through into the gallery called New Materials, New Worlds, which deals with just materiality in art. And you move forward into this gallery, The Beauty of Color and Form, which again, when we said we didn't want to really say artistic movements, So this is really abstraction. Then you go into the politics of identity, and you can go either left or right. This gallery is religion and spirituality. This gallery is African connections, religion and spirituality. Go back up, the struggle for freedom. Now, it's really hard to tell on this, but this gallery extends back up. So then you come into the world around us. And then we have a changing exhibition gallery where we hope to have small focus shows, works on paper, maybe mid-career artists, etc. Like the sky's the limit for that. So here are a few works that are in the gallery entrance. So when you walk into the gallery, the first thing you see is this beautiful William T. Williams artwork. And we think that's just going to really pull people in away from musical crossroads and taking the stage, and they're going to have to come and see this artwork. We also have this glass piece by Thurman Statham. He is the world's preeminent African-American glass artist, and maybe the only one that I know who specifically works in glass. And then this beautiful piece by MacArthur Benyon. When you come into New Materials, New Worlds, this really talks about how artists use non-traditional materials. I was talking to my mother on Mother's Day, and she asked me why I was here. And a part of this conversation was I was telling her about this panel, and she told me that she doesn't feel comfortable with contemporary art. And she said out of all the art museums she would go to, the contemporary art would be last on her list. And I said, why is that? And she says, well, they have these installations, and they put twigs on the floor, and I don't understand that. And I said, Mom, at one point, all art is contemporary. So I said, that French Impressionism that you love, that was really, shocking to people. And I said, in 50 years from now, this will be something that people feel very comfortable with and don't see as really moving against the grain or anything like that. So we just want to show people that using forms of different materials is not something that's scary. It's something that could be really fun. This piece, The Mothership, deals with not only this Apollo space capsule, which you can see at the Air and Space Museum, but also deals with the musical Mothership. Oh my gosh, now the name is escaping me. Thank you, George Clinton. This is a piece that was dedicated to one of our architects who passed away before the building was built, Max Bond. And this piece by B.K. Adams deals with transportation. I think it's going to be really fun and one of probably the most favorite pieces, particularly for young people in the museum. The Beauty and Color in Form. So we chose that title because we wanted people to understand that abstraction, you don't have to have sort of that art historical background to understand about art reflecting upon itself. But what it really is just form and color. And people can appreciate that and relax a little bit about it. And so we have 3 pieces here. And I think you'll notice in this presentation, they're all from different eras. So we don't really differentiate from that. And hopefully in all of the slides, you'll kind of see that. Religion and spirituality. So this is an area that you see a lot of African-American artists gravitating toward. And one of the things that we want our visitor to think about, not only like in the African-American community, there's this huge, well, not huge, but there's this debate about the black and white Jesus. And when I give talks, Jesus was neither black or white, but there's this idea that we want to see ourselves in our religious institutions. We also talked about religion in the form of protest. So this piece, Behold Thy Son, is sort of in memoriam to the assassination of Emmett Till. And we have the casket and exhibition in our segregation gallery dealing with Emmett Till. And we also want to show that African Americans are not just Christians. We're Muslims, we're Buddhists, we're spiritualists. We don't have any religion, and we want to show that diversity in the gallery. African connections. This is something that I feel is a particular interest to African Americans because of that lost connection with our heritage. And when you look over time, there's sort of a progression. So Aaron Douglas in 1938 was looking at Africa and the diaspora in the same way, in much of the same way that a European artist was doing this type of work. And he went there to study Haitian types. Yet when you come to this work of art by Floyd Coleman, there's a more nuanced understanding of African culture. He actually went to Nigeria. He learned about Yoruba art and Yoruba religion. And you can see this because you have the Orisha Shango and all of her implements, and then the Orisha Oya, and then the Orisha Shango, her husband. And then, of course, there's this connection, a modern day connection that we see where you're dealing with the Soweto uprising in 1980 and the fact that African Americans felt very connected with the anti-apartheid movement due to the civil rights movement. And actually, apartheid was modeled after American segregation. So the politics of identity. This is probably one of my most favorite galleries because it gives insight into this issue of who we are as African Americans, and that this is a really complex issue. So, for instance, if you ask any individual what you prefer to call yourself, some people just say, well, I'm an American. Some people say I'm Black. Some people say I'm African American. And you're not going to get just one answer. And I think that this will talk about this idea of an internalized identity. So during the 20s with Meta Vowark Fuller, this is the first Pan-African artwork that was created. And it was commissioned by W.E.B. Du Bois and Charles Spurgeon Johnson. And this is idea of the new Negro when this emerged in the 1920s. Well, a little earlier, but in terms of art at this time. This piece, I think, will be really interesting, Barclay Hendricks, New Orleans Nigga, because it's also, that word is one of the most powerful words in the English language, and there's debate within African American communities. Should you use it? Should you not? Can you turn it around by changing the spelling? Is it a term of endearment? And there's confusion for people who are not Black about that term and who gets to use it and why. And also we have this piece here by Huey Lee Smith, and this is about being a Black artist and feeling isolated. And he talks about that, and we put that in his label. The struggle for freedom. So you do have a work by Claude Clark talking about soldiers fighting for victory overseas in World War II, but also fighting for freedom at home. Elizabeth Catlett, Black is Beautiful. Freedom from this idea that Black isn't beautiful, and liberation that, your skin color, your natural hair color is okay. And then Kara Walker, a very contemporary artist, musing about the Middle Passage. The world around us. This is how artists engage in the world. And one of the things that we do, for example, with the Hale Woodruff, we have this painting next to a Robert Scott Duncanson, a mid-18th, 19th century piece. And I wanted people to see that even though they think they understand the Duncanson, this is the same thing. It's just another era's way of creating a landscape. And finally, our Changing Exhibition Gallery. And this is Myth, Memory, and Reality, the art of Radcliffe Bailey, Renee Stout, and Whitfield Lavelle. And finally, the interactive. We modeled this interactive on the launch pad created by the Art Institute of Chicago in their Decorative Arts Gallery. We'll have 2 of these little interactives in each gallery. And the purpose of this interactive was twofold. And the reason why we decided to do it is that we don't believe that art by African Americans should necessarily be segregated. I didn't come from that background. Jackie didn't come from that background. But because of our mission of our museum, that's the reality of the situation. So one of the things that we wanted to do is put this art in context of the larger art world. So, for example, this is our piece by Joshua Johnson, a portrait of John Westwood. This is not the way it's going to look. This is my poor PowerPoint. It's in design right now. It looks fabulous. So you learn a little more about Joshua Johnson because we don't do bios in the gallery, in the wall text. Then you learn something about his history. So this is his manumission papers. This is an image of a street that he lived on. This exactly is what I was talking about the artist's voice. So this is a article he posted in the paper in 1798, calling himself a self-taught genius. This is the, and I know it's going to turn soon, but this is the companion piece, which is at the National Gallery of Art. So this is John Westwood's children, and this is where they lived, and it's, still in existence. And you learn a little bit more about his family. Then what was it like to be a free person of color? So this is when our visitors, if they don't necessarily think they like art, then they can see that something that they may like, which may be history or issues dealing with slavery and freedom, this is where you can find that there. And finally, this idea of showing that Joshua Johnson wasn't the Black portrait painter, but he was a portrait painter just like all of the other portrait painters of the era. So I just want to end by a quote that we use when people enter the museum by American modernist Charles Austin, and he said this in 1968. He said, and I quote, "I don't believe there's such a thing as Black art, though there's certainly been a Black experience. I've lived it, but it's also an American experience." And I think that sums up what we're trying to do in our gallery. Thank you.
Thank you, Talisa. We'll now hear from Paul Davis, who is curator of collections at the Menil. And I think we're all a little bit too used to podium speaking to stay sitting at the table. So I give you leave.
Can everybody hear me? Congratulations to making it to the end of the day. Let's see, I'm at 17 minutes. Okay, so thank you, Anne, for inviting me to participate in the panel. Appreciate it greatly. I'm excited to share kind of my first 2 years as a reflection on my first 2 years at the Menil in displaying, interpreting, and recontextualizing the permanent collection at the Menil. I've subtitled my talk, "The World of Art Lies Asleep." I'm just going to get right into it, if that's okay, so we can move on. So I subtitled my talk today, "The World of Art Lies Asleep." And that's a quote from Dominique de Menil in her foreword to the Raid the Icebox with Andy Warhol exhibition from the 1969-1970. And it's a quote that I think is relevant to us today in our conversations, and also in the previous sessions as well, in which Dominique really championed the contemporary artists and poets like Warhol as oracles or priests who made art relevant and beautiful and engaging and animated the museums through curating the collections. I think the comments yesterday in the keynote session with Hilton Alves and Darren Walker, and also Rita Frida, were really excellent. And also the last two sessions when we were talking about indigenous issues of permanent collections. Hopefully this talk will address some of that as well. So while granting my talk in this exhibition, this paradigmatic example of engaging collections, I wanted to, that's probably better, huh? I wanted to address the topic of institutional relevancy by speaking about the projects in which I'm currently engaged and which I hope will be relevant to the Menil in the future. My talk is loosely divided into two parts. The first part is the ways in which I've sought to reinvigorate engagement with the collection and learning from the collection. And the second part is my first experiments with exhibition making at the Menil and an evolving comprehension of what exhibition making has been at the Menil. I'd like to close, if there's time, with some open-ended observations or reflections about the nature of contemporary. But first, what do I do at the Menil? So the Menil collection is roughly about 20,000 objects. A good portion of that 20,000 are collections of African, Byzantine, medieval, antiquities, and oceanic. Of course, we're very well known for our contemporary artwork, our surrealism collection, and the shows that we do with those works as well. And in my responsibility, I'm looking after these areas of the collection primarily, and trying to get people to look at them and to engage them. And so what I want to do first is to talk about one of the more prominent projects that I'm involved with. It's a collaborative project. It's called the Collection Analysis Collaborative, and it's a research and education initiative started in 2014 and focuses on the nearly 600 objects in the Manil's collection from the ancient Mediterranean. My project collaborators are John Hopkins, who's a professor of Roman art and antiquity at Rice University, and Sarah Costello, who focuses on the ancient Near East. The Collections Analysis Collaborative brings together scholars, students, art historians, archaeologists, and I think that's a key linchpin, bringing archaeologists into the fold of this discussion about ancient works and cultural heritage. In order to identify innovative approaches to issues of authenticity, display, cultural heritage, preservation, and public and sort of the efficacy of museums' existing permanent collections and their prospective acquisitions. I think one thing that we haven't really touched on here is the way in which the UNESCO Convention 1970 and the subsequent laws and issues with cultural heritage have really impinged upon curators' ability to acquire new works and to deal with accessioning them into the collection. Another project, which my predecessor, Christina Van Dyke, and Professor Dan Price at University of Houston started, planted the seeds of, is this three-dimensional scanning project, which we've been involved with. And you see here Carrie Dodson, our conservator, and Evan Lee, who is a technician and adjunct professor at University of Houston, scanning one of our inland Niger Delta terracottas. And the goal of this project is to create three-dimensional renderings of these objects. And you see the final rendering on the left-hand side there. And these have the goal of this is really to kind of expand access to the collection and provide opportunities to look at these things in 3 dimensions on the internet, much more so than a 2-dimensional image. But also it provides art historical comparisons across institutions, so people can look at objects in 3 dimensions in other institutions. And they also make an incredible curatorial intervention into exhibitions. For example, Sean Mooney, whose exhibition Microcosmos closed not too long ago, incorporated this images. That image, or that actual object, is probably about 2 inches tall. And so this was about the size of the object in the gallery, and so it really blew it up for people to see it at a much different level and play with perspective. Okay, so now creating affecting exhibitions. All right. So the second part of my talk is really about making exhibitions and the institutional history of making exhibitions at the Manil. As I mentioned, I've been at the Manil for about 2 years, and during that time I've been mining the institution, a la Warhol perhaps, for ways to approach the collection and come to a better understanding of the curatorial and exhibition history of the Manil. At the Manil, we favor poetry over pedagogy. Our emphasis is on the objects and not so much on history. We have low physical requirements or parameters that we like to uphold as part of the legacy of the Manil, which is low center hungs around the heart, minimal labels, minimal intervention into the gallery experience, and mutual interrogations of objects and juxtapositions. There's, of course, a tremendous legacy of intellectual and curatorial creativity. And these folks are sort of the predecessors. Father Marie-Alain Couturier, Dominique de Menil, and Germain McKeague, who was brought here by Dominique and John de Menil in the 1950s to head up originally the Contemporary Art Center, and then later became the director or the chair of the art history department at St. Thomas. And of course, Dominique with her, Mrs. de Menil with her, sorry, it's a little familiar, Dominique, I suppose. Madame de Menil, who was, always involved with the curatorial process. And of course, Walter Hopps, who was the first director of the Menil Institution. And looking at some of this history of exhibition making at the Menil, I was really struck by the way, and coming from an academic setting, IU Art, the Indiana University Art Museum, and later the Witz Art Museum, I was struck by the ways in which Germain McKeague and Dominique de Menil really shaped the space in which, much like a Mayan temple, shaped the way visitors experienced the work. And so on the left, you have the Totems Not Taboo exhibition, which was a phenomenal success, although today it might be looked at as somewhat pejorative. And then a Young Teaching collection, which was a really interesting time in terms of the history of the collection, but really emphasized the purpose and function of the collection, which was to learn from the objects and deal and handle them, allow students direct access to these objects. And I think these exhibitions really laid the foundation for what later became a kind of a practice with Christina Van Dyke's show Chance Encounters, which sort of narrated the history of the formation of the African art collection, and was a stunning juxtaposition of African objects with the other parts of the collection, as well as Byzantine Things in the World, which was curated by Glenn Pierce and Susan Sutton, and again drew from all parts of the collection. And so working with these collections, I came up with, working with thinking about these exhibitions and the ways in which the de Menils and Germain McKeague had used gallery spaces and shaped them. I came up with this exhibition, which was entitled Affecting Presence and the Pursuit of Delicious Experiences, which is a bit of a mouthful. But I felt I needed to try on this new shoe and kind of wear it around for a little bit in order to understand what they were trying to get at. And the parts of the title come from Robert Plant Armstrong, who was an Africanist and anthropologist, as well as Dominique de Menil, who wrote, sorry, my wife's calling me. Should I answer? No, that'd be mean. The other part of the title is The Delicious Presence, which was actually taken from the exhibition The Rhyme and Reason in 1984 at the Grand Palais in Paris, and it's a part of the process of visitors coming to an object and pursuing what they find to be delicious or inspiring about the object. And so looking at these two works, I came up with this kind of entrance into the museum. And it's very dark, and you're probably not sure what you're seeing right now. It probably looks a bit like 2001. But this is actually what you're looking at. This is a schematic of the gallery, what is called West Temp. And working with Brooke Stroud and Eric Zimmerman, our exhibition designers, we came up with this entry tunnel where the ceiling actually compresses down on you and the sides also narrow in on you. And what you're narrowing in on and what you're focusing in on is a Chiwara Kun, which is from the Bamana people of Mali. And the idea was, one of the central tenets of the exhibition was abstraction. And it was a response to the MoMA show Inventing Abstraction, which had just come out which had been opened the year before. And I thought about that, and I thought that, abstraction as a thought shouldn't be limited to these white European painters and sculptors. And so I started to think about that in the ways in which this object encourages people to think about movement and motion, and is an abstract sculpture that represents a composite animal, a chihuahua, or a messenger beast. that's used in agricultural ceremonies and performed. And there was no way that I could do the kind of intervention with visitors and informing them about the full diversity of these sculptures, the different styles that they have, the horizontal, the vertical, the different costumes that they wear, the different rhythms of music that are played when these sculptures are performed during agricultural ceremonies to celebrate the best harvester. So I relied on the object itself to kind of create that interest, create that curiosity, and to hopefully inspire the viewer to go further with that. We also did a lot of public programming, and we had some really dynamic speakers who actually almost performed these during public programming. And then the rest of the exhibition was also centered on abstraction as an artistic method or means to convey powerful and ineffable aspects of daily life. And so you have Frank Bolling's Tabernic Tumbles, which was in communication with, in sort of direct response with Sam Gilliam's the St. Moritz outside Mondrian. And you had Morris Lewis's Beta Pi, all these from the collection of the Manil, in another section of the gallery confronting an Ahu Ula from Hawaii, which is a cape worn by the Kamehameha. And this juxtaposition was really an attempt to fill the void of the Morris Lewis in many respects, but also demonstrate the ways in which people are thinking through abstract pattern and doing so all the time. And the way that abstraction can lead to kind of bigger discoveries. And what you don't get, I do have that slide. So this is the model that you saw Dominique de Menil working with earlier. But in this model, you can see the triad that I try to create with the St. Moritz outside Mondrian, Frank Bolling's painting, and the Morris Lewis. And of course, the two African-American painters cite Morris Lewis and the way he used paint and the way he used canvas as an artistic source for their own artistic pursuits. I don't know how much time I have. Okay, I'm gonna just skip through this really quick and just kind of finish. This is a show I'm currently working on. It's called Recollecting Dogon, and it's a show that is based on the Mill's permanent collection, and it's a show that really is about the limitations of collections and what we can actually know from collections and the history of understanding them. And so it engages with archives of museums. The two museum cards are actually from the Branly. The photograph of the sculpture, which is not this one, but another one that's made it's in a similar style, is a Walker Evans photograph from the 1935 exhibition in New York. And then the top left is a postcard that Dominique de Menil received from an anonymous person in the 1970s. And so working with these archives, let's see if it plays. Yeah. Working with audio as well as video and incorporating parts of the permanent collection as well as contemporary masks made by and commissioned for Dogon artists as part of the continuation of the Amma celebration of in Dogon. Hopefully this exhibition will be able to interrogate what we can understand from objects and the ways in which ethnography, particularly French ethnography in this case, has constructed a history that kind of is hegemonic in our understanding of Dogon art, visual culture from Dogon. Okay, this is fun. So, get to the right page here. I just wanted to conclude by a way of kind of open call, maybe it's towards question and answer. In this last year, Charles Ray, who I'd never heard of before, it's pretty sad, right? He gave a really wonderful 3-part public talk about sculpture, space, and holes at the Manil. And during which he said something that really resonated with me, and he said, quote, talking about the Kuros, the Manhattan Kuros, he said, quote, "Yet we don't know what its social purpose was. Was it votive? Was it red? What did it mean?" That's my impersonation, by the way. Quote continues, I asked Richard Neer once, why does it have so much meaning today? Why is it so contemporary? He said, it's because you can see it. And so while I think everyone is capable of seeing the Kuros the way Charles Ray does, I don't think many do for whatever reason. I understand this part of our curatorial mission as an evolving challenge of practice, at which endeavors to affect the opportunities to achieve this vision. And so I wanted to leave with this last slide, which kind of resonates with some of the other talks that we've had today. On the lower left, you have the removal of the Jefferson Davis sculpture from UT Austin. You have the removal of the Cecil Rhodes sculpture from UCT, University of Cape Town, sorry. And then on the top, you have protests by students at UCT and also at Wits, the University of Wits in Johannesburg, against fee tuitions and lack of housing. And so I wanted to suggest, and feel free to be critical in receiving this, but that there's a compression of the contemporary, and that the contemporary moment is becoming increasingly closer to our immediate present, and the challenges of our shared history remain unresolved. And there's this great quote by Achille Mbembe about this, writing about the Cecil Rhodes removal, what he calls the negative moment. And he says, quote, "A negative moment is a moment when new antagonisms emerge, while old ones remain unresolved. It is a moment when contradictory forces, inchoate, fractured, fragmented, are at work, but what might come out of their interaction is anything but certain. It is also a moment when multiple old and recent unresolved crises seem to be on a path towards a collision. Such a collision might happen, or it might not. It might take the form of an outburst that ends up petering out. Whether the collision actually happens or not, the age of innocence and complacency is over." And I think in this quote, he's really juxtaposing these two really powerful forces, the urge towards destruction and the urge towards creativity and production. And if the current presidential campaign is anything, any evidence of that, it is that history is never put to rest, and that the contemporary world must continually revoke outmoded methodologies and invent new, more equitable ones. But knowledge of the former is necessary to achieve the latter. Thanks.
So thank you very much, Paul, for that eloquent close to a set of 3 great presentations. For those of you who can stay and aren't rushing to catch flights yet, I think we might just go straight to Q&A. I mean, I have a list of questions, but I think given time, I'd just rather open it right up. So feel free.
I have. No, she has a question. I was. Thank you so much for all the presentations. That's such a great range of perspectives. Are any of your institutions conducting evaluations or plan to conduct evaluations of how people are experiencing these galleries, these new installations? With if you have just. It's something that we struggle with in our museum. We're trying to do more of. I'm curious.
I think for I'm going to shorten the title, Affecting Presence Show. The first program I did was with a group of Manil contemporaries. And instead of doing a normal kind of lecture, walkthrough, talk about in the gallery, we opened it up to observations, and we provided kind of a contemplative moment for them to think about the show. And then we facilitated interactions inside the gallery between members, and we had them write on cards kind of what they felt. And the goal of the project was to have kind of a digital record of that. And I think they were very appreciative of allowing their opinions to be aired.
Okay, even though we haven't opened yet, in 2007 or 2008, there was a survey that was conducted around the Smithsonian about what people expected to see at our museum, what they wanted to see, whether or not they thought our museum would be there. And a lot of the questions were open-ended, but the answers, I remember reading that survey when it first came out, and then reading it again for another project that I'm working on. And what I realized is that a lot of what we did for this exhibition sort of reflects what people want to see in this museum, not necessarily in art, because a lot of the answers, or most of the answers, didn't have anything to do with visual art, but it had to do with culture and history, and how do you place African Americans in American history, and what people expect to see. So I think the museum sort of, in a large sense, really took that to heart, and then we sort of reflected what's in that gallery. And of course, there were audience surveys. We have a satellite site at American History, so we did do audience surveys and exhibitions that were there. And of course, we will do them after we open. I think it would be necessary, very necessary to do it once we open, to see what was successful and what was not so successful once we open.
Unfortunately, we're not there yet at the Athenaeum, having surveys about our visitors. We have been affected by cuts among the staff in 2007, 2008, and since then we haven't fully recovered. So I think that this is now an excellent moment, and discussions about surveys have just begun. But for the past years, all the efforts were focusing on the reinstallation and the rehang of the galleries.
Joachim and I are concerned that Paul should call his wife. No, I do have a question. And it could be for anyone, actually, because what we've seen today are two almost extremes of audience engagement, if you will, with the Manil and the African American, especially having interactives and interpretation and so on. And I'm curious to know what level of comfort curatorial feels with this kind of, to what extent do we want to have this? What do we find effective to enhance the interpretation and so on? Does that make sense? What are your museums doing? To what extent do you feel this is being imposed on you? To what extent do you think it is a benefit to your project?
Speaking for one end, I guess. So I think it's probably fair to say that the Athenaeum in the past had a rather low-key approach towards technology and engaging visitors interactively. We want to do more. We were hoping to do more with the reinstallation. I think I pointed out the Kunst- und Wunderkammer, which has some elements, which is great and which is very much appreciated by our visitors. We were hoping to do something in Morgan Great Hall. I think that's a wonderful space that deserves something like that. Unfortunately, we run out of time, we run out of means, we run out of staff capacities to do that. And that is, again, that's another project that could be easily done during the next few years.
I think for our gallery, we were very cognizant of being in a history museum. And history museums don't just show objects without context. And people are coming to that museum because they want a greater understanding of our history as a nation, our history as a culture, because there's very little material that people are going to get as they go through school, unless they take a course in college or really on their own decide to learn about it. You're not going to get it. Most Americans aren't going to have that information. And we also live in, essentially a very segregated society, so that the interaction is not there to learn. So unless you're just going to a Black History Museum, and as we know from statistics, that generally just African Americans go to culturally specific museums, we need to provide that information. And the other issue that we're trying to do is change this paradigm. So for us, the extended wall text and the interactives, and eventually, perhaps a year after we're open, we're going to do an intro film, which will help set the stage in terms of thinking about art created by African Americans on a larger scale, as American art, as international art, as something that really made a difference in the canon, and something that the art world would not be the same without. So I think that even for those of us, and myself included, who grew up and studied aspects of this field in books and things, has always been separate. So we need those interactives, and we need that film to sort of widen our scope.
I guess I'm one of those people who want to be separate characters. And I was thinking that, thank you. I want to make the artwork accessible to my audiences, but I despair that what I write in 100 words is in any way approaching what this complex object is all about. And I just wonder if, and I also don't want to be, to a certain degree, I don't want to be the interpreter. I want our visitors to feel, as the artists often tell me, that that personal experience is key to their appreciation of that object.
Well,
I think that your actually is the exception because of the context of yours. But I'm wondering if there are other curators in the audience who might be able to talk about, or do they struggle the way I worry about this?
If I could throw in here, because I think you mentioned the word accessible, and actually one of the points that was made in our preparatory conversations for this panel was pointing out this, maybe that accessibility and relevance are perhaps related, but perhaps different terms. And so that might be something we could dig into also is, I think accessibility is the less contested term, and that relevance is sort of suggesting another level of perhaps contemporary context. And so that might be a tension in certain institutions that we need to resolve.
My comment or question centers on exactly that issue. We're going through a strategic planning process right now in Birmingham, and one of the things that's been brought out in our initial needs assessment is the way we engage visitors in the permanent collection galleries, which the tone that our installations, I think, are beautiful, and that's one of the things that we hear most often from visitors. But then in terms of the content, the labels, the text panels are very declarative and giving the sense that people are being talked to, not spoken with. And when I think about what makes any gallery, whether it's a gallery of Byzantine art or the most current contemporary installation, what makes it seem contemporary is the tone that the curator strikes and an ability to bring the visitor in a way that is accessible, and that is not trying to bombard that person with a complete treatise on the work at hand or the historical movement in question at one moment. I think there's a lot to be said for multiple levels of engagement, like just like what you're doing with the, having the iPad, where if you want more, this is where you can get it. But being sensitive to just how much information people can take in at any one moment, how long you have to capture their attention, but also really specifically the tone. We don't always have to play the sage on the stage.
Also, as someone, Allison Green from Houston, who frets a great deal about labels and placement of labels, one of the things I think we're also sort of struggling to deal with in the contemporary world as well as historic presentations is that, well, visual language used to be the common language. Giotto did not have, subtitles in his chapel. It was one way to make the scripture universally understood. We've sort of become visually illiterate in many ways, despite the fact that we're bombarded by news images. And I wonder, the MFA has a huge outreach program to very young audiences because art is no longer taught in schools. And I think that is actually one of the things we always have to be conscious of, not only just bringing a school group to the museum, but outreach to help schools that no longer teach visual arts to make people aware of this visual culture that can so easily enrich their lives.
Well, I think all the curators struggle with this label issue. I'm a little old school, and I'm also sort of a social historical scholar. And I think that in some ways we still have to remember that we are the experts, and we did study this, and we spend a lot of time choosing the works of art, studying the works of art. Why are we bringing this into the collection? And I think that our visitors sometimes struggle with why that's there. So, like I said, going back to that conversation with my mother collects art, but she collects still lifes and landscapes. So when she goes into this gallery and sees an installation, it's jarring, and she doesn't know why that's there. And then I have this conversation with her, and she feels better about it. And I think you also have to realize that people who don't want to read labels won't read them. I go into galleries, I don't need to read the labels. I'm just looking at the art, and as a curator, I'm also looking at the installation and the wall colors and all of that other kind of stuff. But I think sometimes, I don't know if you can overthink it or not, but you have to do what you feel is right for your institution and your audience, which is different as you move across the country. What's right for something, the Met, is different than the Dayton Art Institute, because we had a blue-collar town. And so people needed a little bit more, as opposed to, a major city where people are more sophisticated. DC, most people have college and graduate degrees. So it's a different sort of audience. So, I know we struggle with it, but sometimes I feel like, you have to do what feels right for you.
Thank you. Thank you for a really interesting set of presentations. I think it's useful I'm picking up on the term relevance here, and I think it's useful to broaden that term out, because often when we think about relevance, we think, how can we add something to the label that relates to the visitor? And I think another way of thinking about this is to try and imagine why visitors have come into your museum. And it will be for a wide variety of different reasons. Sometimes it might be because they've got friends in town and they sort of want to use it as a backdrop to take a stroll, chat to people, catch up on things. Sometimes it might be to escape because it's a beautiful place and you just want to sit. Sometimes it's to visit old friends, to visit objects and to visit art that you know really well. Sometimes it's to learn because you do want to learn about the history, because you do want to learn about the history of art. And I can keep on going. And there's quite a lot of research to back this up, the reasons why people visit museums and galleries. And so what I would say is when we talk about relevance, there's no one answer. It's almost about I would suggest it's almost about thinking about all these different things and thinking how you can stop putting barriers, or how we can stop putting barriers in the way of visitors doing all these things. So for visitors who do want to learn, how do we provide that? For visitors who do want to contemplate, how do we provide that? For visitors who do want to use it as a way of stimulating their children, how do we provide something that does that? And I just think that's a really interesting way to start to think about this whole interpretation question.
Thanks for that. I would say I think there's your suggestion that perhaps a diversity of approaches, even a diversity of kinds of spaces or display practices would be necessary. And I guess my question to this group would be, to what extent in your institutions do you feel that you have the freedom to express that diversity or to work in different ways, or are there larger directives that tend to crush those individual voices? Because I think that you're absolutely right, that there's no way to anticipate a single kind of visitor, and there's got to be something for almost everyone.
I want to go back 2 steps and just add my personal experiences by writing the wall labels, which I think I mentioned that we all kind of agreed to concentrate on broader topics, humanistic topics, instead of looking at specifically art historical, stylistic questions. And I first followed that and felt very happy with it. But the longer I worked with the labels, the more cases I was facing that I felt uncomfortable with. So I think that you mentioned it, that it's really a question about the ratio, about what you allow yourself to do and what the collection allows yourself to do. So I think that we should rather give ourselves a little bit more flexibilities. We had a lot of discussions about that at the Athenaeum. My colleague, the curator of decorative arts, she felt less torn into these 2 directions than I did. But I felt that there was at times there was a value in saying something, that the painting by Caravaggio, to pick an example, is a very early painting, and it matters because it is early, and he's experiencing for the first time such and such thing, instead of, I don't know, just concentrating on St. Francis or on the saint or something like that. So I feel still divided, and after that, going out of this huge campaign that led me to write, I think, 400 labels or so, I feel less secure than going in, and I feel actually more torn than before. Ideally, I'd like to redo it a second time, but that's unfortunately not possible, I guess.
I will say, when I first started at the Dayton Art Institute, I had a show. We had traveling shows that were already in the books. So one was Scenes of American Life, which was a fairly benign show from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So labels, a lot of the art explained itself. It wasn't very difficult. My second show was Looking Forward, Looking Black. All this quote-unquote post-Black artists, Renee Cox, Michael Ray Charles, with some really very offensive imagery to your average sort of Dayton community. It was a really, really contemporary, cutting-edge show. And when I was talking to my director, I was like, do you think this is okay? Just because I'm Black, I'm going to mount this show. I feel comfortable with it. And so he allowed me to change it. And my first gallery was a gallery of stereotypical imagery and objects. Mammies, Uncle Toms, the Gold Dust Twins. And then we went and I added another few galleries dealing with art of the Black arts movement, which is, a very different perspective than the contemporary art. But African Americans didn't go into that museum. Dayton was about 47% Black. It was segregated down the river. One was African Americans, one was whites. And when I first started working there, we had one Black image in the museum, and that was of a pickaninny. And when I first came in looking for a job, I was told I could work in the cafe, even though I had graduate degrees. So it was that kind of environment that I walked into and had to do this show. So the show had to have labels. And we had a man who worked there, he worked in facilities, and he went through the exhibition, wrote this horrible comment. And I read the comment and I talked to him and I said, he was like, I can't believe you did this show, blah, 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 blah. I said, did you read the labels? And he said, no. I said, go back through and read the labels. And he came back and he said, I love the show. And sometimes that's what the power of labels can do. So certain shows don't need them at all, or maybe need very few. Certain shows, New Orleans Nigga was in that show, that needed a really long label. So it's just the environment that I was in to do a show like that had to have some sort of explanation.
Hi, Barbara Jones from the Westmoreland Museum of American Art. We too grappled with labels and interpretation. We were closed for 2 years for construction and renovation and expansion, like a lot of people. And one of the things we did when we were in our temporary quarters is I actually asked our visitors what they wanted to know in the labels. And so they were able to go around to the various paintings and put Post-its up with their questions. And so when that was done, when I was writing also probably 400 labels, I answered those questions. And they were, people have been really responding positively to those because I don't know if it's the people who ask them, but they come in and find out the answer. So.
If there are no more questions, I want to thank you all for your attention and thank all our three panelists for their wonderful presentations. Thanks so much.
Well, for those of you that are still here, I want to thank you for joining us in Houston. I hope you leave us inspired, ready to embrace new approaches, new ways of thinking, particularly as you look at hiring processes, internships, and mentorship programs. I want to thank all our guests, speakers, as well as, of course, our conference chairs, Allison DeLima Green and Griffith Mann, and our president, Helen Evans, for their leadership and dedication in making this a spectacular event. Our next conference in 2017 will be May 6th through 9th in New York City. And in between conferences, don't forget, we have webinars, programming, grants. So please check them out. We're not just about our conferences. So thank you all, and have a good night, and bye.